Have you ever felt like you're completely fed up with the way that your chord progressions sound, or perhaps you feel like you're stuck in a bit of a creative rut when it comes to putting cool chord progressions together? You are not alone. This is something that happens to all of us. It's very easy to get stuck when thinking about chords, especially when we want to get creative within the realms of writing chord progressions. Now, when we do write chord progressions, it's quite easy to always fall back on the basic things and just strum along and always go for the easy option. But in this video, we're going to look at 7 cool chord tricks that are going to make you a better guitar player, and they're going to take your chord progressions to that next level. This video is brought to you in partnership with Music Radar, so if you want to check out the written accompaniment to this lesson, you can scroll down to the description and there's going to be a link to the Music Radar website where you can read about all of the tips that we talk about in this video. So all of these tips are varying in difficulty level, so whether you're a new player that's just getting into creative chord progressions, or whether you've been playing for a while and you want to break out of a box or a habit that you're stuck in, there's going to be something in this video for everyone. All of the tips are also timestamped down below in the description, so you can go ahead and click one of those timestamps to go forward to that point of the video as well. All of these things are designed as concepts, so you can take any of these things and run with them and use them in your own creative ways. You don't have to use them exactly as they're explained in this video. So the first tip we're going to talk about is learning the caged system. Now, the caged system is a really useful system that allows us to play any major chord we want anywhere on the guitar using just 5 shapes. And the shapes are spelt out in the word caged. C, A, G, E, and D. Now, these are open chord shapes that we already know. Using these 5 shapes, we can play major chords anywhere on the fretboard as a series of bar chords. Now, I'm going to skip ahead now to the A and E shapes from the cage system, because the chances are you've already learned these as bar chords. So if you've learned your 6-string major bar chords like this, or your 5-string major bar chords like this, you've already used the cage system without even realizing it. So what I'm actually playing when I do a 6-string major bar chord like this is I'm actually playing an E chord shape. So if I look at an E major chord shape there without using my index finger, I'm just playing that in a higher register on the guitar and using my index finger to bar across the strings to replace the open string position. So this is actually in the form of an E major chord. But I'm playing it here and barring across the 5th fret. That 5th fret on the low E being an A note, this gives me an A major chord, but in the form of an E major shape. The same is also true of the A form of the cage system. So if we take an A major chord and we move that anywhere else, we can get other bar chords. So I'm going to go back to the 5th and 7th frets again here. So I'm going to bar across the 5th fret from the A string down, like I would if I was playing a regular A chord. My A string open with my lowest note. So I'm going to go off the 5th fret of the A string now as being my lowest note. So that's my open string. And then above that, I'm playing my A major chord shape. You can do that with 3 fingers, or you can do it with a single finger barring like so. And that gives me a D major chord. So I'm playing A and D major chords, but in the form of E and A major chords. Now, this is a transposable idea, so you can move this anywhere on the guitar. You can play a C major like this, for instance, at the 8th fret of the low E, or a G major at the 3rd fret. The same is true for the A shape. Now, the cage system allows us to unlock these different variations of major chords, which is great for layering guitar parts. Now we have the other 3 letters, the C, G, and D. Now, these are where it gets slightly more complicated. So let's look at the C chord. We're playing a regular C major chord here. If we want to turn this into another chord, this note here is our root note. So the note that I'm playing on the 3rd fret of the A string, that needs to be the root of the chord. So let's say I want to play an A, so I need to find an A note on the same string with this finger, which would be the 12th fret. I need to build my C chord from there. But what I now need to do is account for the fact that the 9th fret now is where my open string would be. So I need to play my C chord with these 3 fingers, and then my index finger takes the place of the open string. That's now an A major chord, but in a C form. I could do a D major chord by playing that same shape from the 5th fret like so, or an E major from the 7th fret. But I'm still playing a C shape chord. Same is true for G. Now G is slightly more complicated because this is a much more complex shape. I'm going to be playing that with 3 fingers like this. This works better higher up the neck. So let's root that from a D note here, for instance. I then need to bar the 7th fret. So this is a much bigger stretch for this chord. That would be a D major chord. And if I take that G form and shift it up another 2 frets, we get an E major chord. This is probably the hardest version of the cage shapes you could use. So this is the one you're probably going to not use as much if you're a newer player, but it is very useful for getting different chord voicings. And the final shape of the cage system is the D form, which is the open D major chord. So we've got the open D string here being our root note. What we can do here is move this to wherever we want, but we need to play this with our other 3 fingers, freeing up our index finger to reach 2 frets back to the root. So this root here on the 5th fret of the D string is a G note. So this is actually a G major chord, but in the form of a D. If I move that up 2 frets, we get an A. So while that is just a really quick overview of what the cage system is, you can really go in depth with this and you can come up with all sorts of cool chord voicings. Now, a great exercise that I'm going to show you to really help you visualize where everything is in the cage system is to take one chord. So I'm going to use C major for this. Then I'm going to play C major in all 5 positions of the cage system. And you can try this with the other letters of the system as well. So the first shape is a C major chord as a C form. The second is going to be a C major chord as an A form. The third is going to be a C major chord as a G form. The fourth is going to be a C major chord as an E form. And the 5th is going to be a C major chord as a D form. You can try that exercise yourself with the other letters of the cage system, but also all the diagrams you're going to need are in the lesson plan linked below in the description as well. Tip number 2 is alternating between bass and treble notes. Now this is something really cool you can do when you're strumming along. So if you usually find your strumming patterns sound like this, this method will give you something new to work with. So I'm going to play this very loosely. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to break up each chord into 2 parts. Bass notes and treble notes. So this doesn't have to be an exact science. We're just playing a lower version of the chord and a higher version of the chord by breaking up the strum. So I'm playing some of the lower strings and some of the higher strings. Don't get too hung up on making this really, really precise and accurate. The looser you play this, the more natural it will sound. Because in most guitar players' natural playing styles, they will do this by habit anyway without having to think too much about it. So that's going to take strumming a G chord from this to this. So you can change the rhythm up a little bit to suit this as well. You can really emphasize those bass notes. Or you can emphasize the treble notes. There's a load of different ideas you can do with this. It's basically just breaking up the chord into low and high notes and then seeing where that rhythm takes you. Tip number 3 is adding a 5th in the bass of the chord. So there's a little bit of theory involved with this. So if you don't know too much about chord theory, don't worry at this stage. This will all become apparent as you go down that road in your playing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to spice up a few common open chords by adding a note known as the 5th in the bass of the chord. So the chords we're going to be looking at are going to be C major, D major, and F major. So in a C major chord, the 5th is a G note. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add this G note in the bass of my C chord. So that's going to give me this C and C with a G in the bass. There's a much richer sound to that. All I'm doing is I'm taking my regular C chord My third finger is going up to play that G note, and then my little finger is coming in on the root note, the 3rd fret of the A string. That's just going to give me a much richer sounding C chord. I can do the same with a D, so if I play my conventional D chord, my 5th in a D is an A note, so I'm going to add this open low A string. And I can also do the same with an F, which is this. The 5th of an F is a C note, so we're going to approach this kind of like we did with the C chord with the G in the bass. My 3rd finger here is going to come up to play the C note, and then my little finger is going to go back on the F root. All I'm really doing here is adding a single note to each chord, the 5th, but in the bass, and doing that just gives the chord a much richer flavour. You can do this yourself with other chords as you go along, and as you understand chord theory more, you can apply this idea in other areas of your playing. The 4th tip is something you can use if you're playing funk rhythms, and that's sliding a chord a semitone lower into the chord you're playing. So I'm going to use a dominant 9 chord for this, a D dominant 9 here at the 5th fret of the A string. Great funk chord, and I'm just going to have my funk groove, which is going to go like this. Now, if I really want to spice that up, what I can do is I can take that D dominant 9, drop it down a fret, but slide it back into the D. It's a really simple but really effective trick you can do, and it really spices up boring funk rhythms. Instead of just staying on one chord, you can slide from a semitone lower into that chord at certain points just to emphasize the change. Now, I did that with a dominant 9, but you can do this with any chord. You can do it with just a regular minor chord. Just take the chord that you're playing, drop it down a fret and slide it back into the chord. It just creates a sense of impact on that chord change. Tip number 5 is breaking up 6-string bar chords into thumb and triad patterns. So let's say I've got an A major chord like this, and an A minor chord like this. Pretty common shapes, A major and A minor. If you're a fan of players like Hendrix, John Mayer, and all those kind of strat guys that do a lot of interesting stuff with their chords, this method's going to benefit you. So what we're going to do is we're going to break that major chord up into 2 key elements. The root note and this major triad, which is the 7th fret of the D, which is an A note, the 6th fret of the G, which is a C sharp note, and the 5th fret of the B, which is an E note. But to play this, I'm not going to play it in a conventional bar method like so. I'm going to break it up like this. I'm going to play the triad with my 1st, 2nd, and 3rd fingers. So 5, 6, 7, like I showed you. The bottom of my index finger is actually muting the high E string, so I don't need to worry about that string. And the tip of my 3rd finger, the one that's on my A note on the 7th fret of the D string, is muting the A string. So I don't need to worry about that string. My thumb then is going to play the root note. So I've got thumb, and then my 3rd, 2nd, and 1st fingers on the D, G, and B, with the A and E muted. Doing this removes 2 duplicate notes from the chord. This note here, the 7th fret of the A string, which is the 5th, and also this upper octave note here. So we're actually removing some duplicate notes, which actually makes the chord a little purer sounding. There's less clutter, and it just frees up some sonic space. So I'd have my major chord like this, as opposed to this. So there's a little bit less harmonic information going on there because I've removed some notes, but it's actually a little cleaner sounding, which means in a band context with other instruments going on, we're actually freeing up some sonic space for the guitar to cut through a little bit more. We can also do minor chords with this method. The note that we need to change here is this note here that my middle finger is playing. Like when we do a major to a minor bar chord, we remove that middle finger. What we're essentially doing is we're taking that note and we're turning it into this note, which is the 5th fret, which is a C note, so that's the 5th on the G string. That makes it minor. So in terms of a triad, I'm going from this to this. So I'm actually barring the 5th on the G and B now. Major, minor. The rule for the thumb is still the same, but now I have a minor triad. You can use these shapes to substitute for your regular major and minor bar chords, and this allows you to do extra things like embellish the chords, which we're going to talk about in a later tip in this video. So to recap, that's major, that's an A major because we're rooting from this A with the thumb, but we can move that round to C, D, G, and anywhere else we want. And if we take the middle finger note and flatten it, we get minor. You can also use this method with other chord extensions like dominant 7s, major 7s, minor 7s, and so on. But if you're new to it, it's best just to start with major and minor just to get a feel for it, and then you can advance it further down the line. Tip number 6 is hammering on from a minor to a major third. This is a cool little chord trick you can use if you're playing 12-bar blues style progressions, and it's a great way to spice up that progression. So I'm actually going to be starting here with an A minor 7 chord, but I'm going to be playing it in that thumb and triad method. So to play this, I'm playing the A note, which is my root with my thumb, and then my triad is going to be the 5th fret on the D, G, and B strings. So it's 5 on the low E, 5 on the D, G, and B, the A and high E muted. That is an A minor 7 chord. Now if we think back to when we talked about major versus minor triads, the note that I was changing was this note here on the 6th fret of the G. So that's my major with that 6th fret on, and it's minor with it off. If I'm playing a 12-bar blues, I can actually alternate between these two things. By adding that note back on, even though this is a major third, because I'm not playing this root note here, I'm playing the 5th on the D, what I'm actually playing is an A dominant 7. So that means I've got minor 7 to dominant 7. This works great in a 12-bar blues context because we can play major and minor pentatonics over a dominant 7 chord. So if you're playing a minor blues, you could play over that as well, and then over that dominant 7, when we do that hammer on, you can throw in a couple of major licks as well. Now a cool little extra thing you can do with this is once you've done that, you can use your 3rd finger to bar across the 7th fret of the D, G, and B strings like this. And we can get some cool little blues grooves by going So I'm kind of combining a few different things we've already talked about there. So I'm actually doing this concept of taking that minor 7 and hammering onto a dominant 7. Then I'm adding this extra triad. I'm landing on that A root note there on the D string. But you'll notice I'm alternating between treble and bass strings as I'm going. So I'm actually combining a few different things there. If you're playing this as a full 12-bar loop, what you could even do is you could go to a dominant 9 chord on the 4 chord, which would be a D dominant 9, and an E9 on the 5 chord, and you can use that sliding chord idea as well. So you could do something like this. Great way to spice up 12-bar blues progressions, and you can find your own groove with that as well. I played that with a bit of a shuffle, but you can do whatever you want with that. You don't have to play it as I played it. And the 7th and final thing we're going to talk about is embellishing chords. Now this again takes us straight back into the realm of playing those triad chords with the thumb, so major and minor. But what we're going to do here is we're going to use pentatonic scales to embellish the chord. Now this takes us straight into the Jimi Hendrix realm. So there's two things I need you to do here. I need you to visualize 2 different scales over 2 different chords. So when I'm playing a major chord like this, you need to visualize the A major pentatonic. around that chord shape. And when I play the minor triad, it's the A minor pentatonic. So we're going to start with major. If I go back to visualize that major pentatonic at the top, that's about as far as we need to go because we're playing the chord inside of that. That note there, I'm already playing in the chord, and this note here, I'm already playing in the chord. But with my little finger, I can add this note on the 7th fret of the B, or the 7th fret of the E. I could drop my index finger to bar across the high E as well. So that gives me 3 extra notes there. And all of that is done by a chord shape and a scale. Another one I can add is the 7th fret of the G. This actually makes it a suspended chord, so a sus4. This is a great way to take a chord and add a melodic flavour to it. And you can see all I'm doing there is actually just using my little finger to add notes on. Now, I'm going to preface that by saying that is harder to do than it looks in video, because when you first try this, it's quite difficult to get your little finger to do what you want. So start slow, pick a note. I always like to start with the sus4 note there, and just get used to playing a groove on the chord. And then add that note in and out when it feels right. Then you can progress on to other notes like I did there, so perhaps the 7th fret of the B string. Then a combination of the 2 notes. If we're doing minor, we're just using the minor pentatonic scale, so that's an A minor chord with a minor pentatonic. Same principle applies, but a different scale. So there you go, there are 7 chord tricks you can use right away to improve your chord progressions, take them to that next level, and make yourself a better player. They're great for breaking out of any creative ruts or habits that you're stuck in. If you have any chord tricks or tips that you want to share with the viewers as well, throw those down below in the comments. I'd love to hear if you guys think I missed anything off this list. If you want to check out all the chord diagrams and more information about all the exercises and tips that we talked about, there's also a link down below to the Music Radar website. You can go check that out as well. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you're new here. And obviously, like I said, let me know what you thought of this video down below in the comments. Let me know how you got on with these chord tips and tricks. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon.